Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 102. I want to dedicate this episode Le'ilui Nishmas Zalman Pevzner, whose birthday, Chav Bei Shvat, was born in Tafshin Nun Gimel, and this year would have been his 23rd year, and specifically, as Rabbi brought this connection to My Life Chassidus Applied, he wrote a very powerful essay, which was titled The Battle. Surreally, that's what it was titled, The Battle. And it's you can see it online at meaningfullife.com/Torah/The Battle, with a apostrophe between the and battle. With a hyphen, I should say, not apostrophe, a hyphen. So may Chus of the essay he wrote, Chassidus, that in many ways gave him more time in this world, as his family shared with us. May that's Chuz Embeishstein and his family, and we should only celebrate Simchas as we're about to enter into Adar Rishon this year, Shenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. Since we're talking about the essays, this was last year's essay contest, so we're now smack in middle of the second annual essay contest, My Life Chassidus Applied Essay Contest. A little more than around 2.5 weeks left. That deadline is February 24th. Tezvav Adar Rishon. So I encourage you have time to do so. And I'd like to also announce, we'll soon see it online, the beginning of the judges that we've chosen, prestigious judges, and it's information. There'll be more announced, but the ones that have confirmed so far, so you're hearing it now for the first time. As I mentioned, we made two sets of judges, one that will judge the English essays and one that will judge the Hebrew essays, simply to broaden the ability to cover all the essays, which last year surprised us the amount. We did it, but we felt the importance to have a wider consensus and a broader scope of judges. So the judges are, as I said, information, Rabbi Label Altein, Dr. Yaakov Brower, Dr. Shimon Cowan, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Jacobson, Rabbi Shalom Lipsker, Rabbi Label Shapiro, Rabbi Ezra Shachat, Rabbi Fivers Vogel, and more to come. This is not in any way diminishing the other ones that we will be announcing. It's just simply we haven't reached everyone, and we're still confirming with different people. And specifically geared to Hebrew, we have Rabbi Asher Farkash, Rabbi Kusil Farkash, Rabbi Zalman Gopen, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Gerari, Rabbi Yecheskel Sefer. And again, there'll be more to come. Now, I want to make two specific things I'd like to share. Number one, I repeat what I've said, and I say it again. We've specifically and deliberately engineered this essay contest in a way that give the widest possible equal chance for everybody to win. So it's not made for people who dafke, those that are either brilliant writers or the ones that understand Chassidus best. It's Chassidus applied. It's taking an Inyan Chassidus and applying it to a life situation. And the guidelines that we have we laid out, which is all online, meaningfullife.com/contest, makes it possible for any person who follows those guidelines to win. As we saw last year, the top 10, the first top winners, and the top 10, even top 20, were people most people had no clue who they were. Meaning that it really is an equal opportunity type of contest. That's number one. Number two, I've heard some people ask questions since they already wrote an essay last year. They may not feel the same motivation. Well, I'm not suggesting that $10,000 may be enough for you, but it's quite a nice incentive. Number two, yes, last year's entrance and even winners can submit an entry. There are guidelines of how to do that as well. You can find that online. And I encourage everybody to participate, even those that did it last year. Apply yourself. If you want to adapt, if yours was not a winning essay, you want to adapt it, rewrite it in a different way. As I suggested last week, I will give two main tips. Make sure you go through the guidelines when you finish writing it, that everything is covered, that everything in the guidelines. And secondly, show it to someone, at least one person or more, objective person, to read it through how they see it. It's a very valuable component in all writing, and especially when you're doing a contest, and make sure that they also check with the guidelines. It gives you a much more chance to get a higher mark than if you don't do that. And again, I encourage, we have 2.5 weeks, and this is, I believe, can create a true revolution, both within and without, smoking out great talent, And additionally, just the simple fact that we all apply ourselves to take an inyan chassidus and apply it to a challenge or an issue in life. I mean, that's the whole kavanah of your futza meinesecha chutza. That's what meinesecha chutza means. To spread, to disseminate meinesecha, the well springs of chassidus, chutza. Chutza to outward, not just in space, but also outward in quality, in echus, that you're dealing with people who are living in the chutza world, meaning that you're applying the chassidus in a way that anyone can understand it and anyone can appreciate this lesson, whatever lesson it is that the essay is conveying, this lesson and tools and methodology in how to help people face a challenge, grow, deal with difficulty, or whatever the topic may be. So, now let's move into, since it's, as I mentioned, Od Rishon, we just benched Od Rishon. This year's Shana Muberes, which literally means a pregnant year. As we know, that's the name for the leap year. A leap year every 19 years, there are 7 leap years, in order to create a reconciliation between the lunar cycle and the solar cycle. Why do we need to do that? Because we learn from the fact that it says B'chedesh Ha'aviv, that Pesach should be in the spring season. So Mikan, we learn that you have to be Ma'aberes Hashanim, because if you don't, there's a discrepancy of around 11 and a half days between the solar cycle and the lunar cycle, which means the solar cycle is around 365 days, and the lunar cycle is approximately 363 and a half days, and 353 and a half days, making it 11 and a half days. So if 11 and a half days, 1 year, doesn't sound like much. So the first Pesach was spring. Spring is determined by the seasons, which are the solar cycle. On the other hand, Pesach is on Tezvav Nisan. That's the time when the Eden left Egypt, which is determined by the lunar cycle, the 15th of the month. The month begins with Chodesh, begins the new moon. So 11 and a half days, the first year Pesach would be 11 and a half days shorter if you just left it on its own cycle, because it would still be in the spring, but it would be 11 and a half days shorter. The next year would be 22 and some days shorter. And the next year would be 33 and some, 34. And it would continue to accumulate. At some point, Pesach would start happening in the winter. And then going further, would become in the autumn, and then back in the summer. And then it would come back to Aviv, to the spring. So from this, Chazal learn from the fact that it has to be in month of the spring season, as well as the 15th of the month. We learn that with Ma'aber the Shonim, that's how we reconcile. So every 19 years, which is called a Machzor Cotton, is a short cycle. The Machzor Gadol is the classic time we make a Birchas Hachama. That's every 29 years. So what we do is every 19 years we honor. We call it Shana Muberes, and we add a month called the month of Adar, an extra month, the last month in the Chodesh Hashana, because the lunar cycle, as we know, begins Achedesh Hazel Lechem with Nisan. So the last month of the year, we make 2 months. 2 months of 29 days, more or less, means that every 3 years, or as I said, every 7 times, every 19 years, you keep the balance. So it may fall out of balance a bit, but then you add a month, which then adds to the lunar additional days. That's longer than the solar cycle, and that keeps the balance going. So one critical question, of course, is why is this so important? It's true the Torah says it, but we know there are lunar cycles. For example, the Muslims follow a lunar cycle without any reconciliation. The Christian Western world follows a solar cycle without any reconciliation. Why is it so important that it could be in the season and in the day of the month? Why do we need to be reconciled between Chodesh and Shana, which is basically the sun and the moon? So the Rebbe, in a number of places, explains, and I believe I've also mentioned here, because solar and lunar reflect 2 mahalchim, 2 types of, 2 tracks, you can say, in life. The sun is a mashpia, the moon is a makabel. The sun transmits, the moon receives. It reflects the light of the sun. Additionally, the sun is a consistent flow of light with very few fluctuations, even though there are sunspots and there are shifts, but they're very minimal and they're not that obvious to us. The moon, on the other hand, is constantly going through cycles. A new moon, then there's the first quarter, the full moon, the third quarter, and then again, constant fluctuations. It waxes and wanes. What this symbolizes in the Maimonim of Chassidus, it talks about that these two Mahalchim, these two Me'eris, Hagdelin, each one symbolizes a different type of Aveda. One is the Aveda of transmitting in a consistent way, and one is the Aveda of receiving, and it waxes and wanes, it goes through changes, constant changes. In life, we need both. We need that strong source that is constantly transmitting and emitting energy in life. We also need to be recipients in a state where we go through the changes, because we all go through changes in life. So you could think that you have one that's exclusive to the other, mutually exclusive. Comes another Torah and says, no, we create a Shana Muberes, a year that we reconcile the two, because both are necessary and they both have to balance out each other. So it's not enough just to be one type of personality that's the consistent personality, the other one that is the so-called spontaneous personality. They both feed into each other. And psychologically, whether it's in marriage or in relationships, you see both are necessary. You need to have a reliable partner. You need to have a reliable foundation upon which to build, like the sun-like personality, and strong, consistent, but you also need changes. We have to adjust to changes. We have to also be in that state of receiving. In that sense, the Jewish people are compared, of course, to the moon, and we count by the moon. And we say, the Gemara says, just like the moon is a cotton, the smaller luminary, so too the Jewish people are symbolized by David hu HaKatan, Yaakov hu HaKatan, David hu HaKatan, symbolized by our bittul. So the Levana captures the concept of bittul in the language of Chassidus and Kabbalah, Malchus. And the sun is Zoh, the Midas, that are Mashpia. So the Midas are transmitters. The moon is a recipient, less lamagar malklum, it doesn't have much anything on its own. However, as it absorbs and receives, it reveals a deeper dimension, as Chassidus says, that Malchus is rooted in Keser and all the way in Atzmus. That's why it's in Malchus, which is compared to the earth, as the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKedesh 20. The earth has the power to create. The woman is the one that carries the child, Malchus. It's after in this world that we can create something new. Because Malchus has that power. No, it's seifim b'tchilosim b'seifon, which means the beginning is wedged in the end, and the end is wedged in the beginning. Seif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, that the end product is what arose in the beginning and even in the earliest stages of thought. So Malchus has that power. But to reveal that, you need to have the sun hashpah. So we need both. Chassidus explains, you need Eir and you need Kalim. You need Eir and you need Yesh. This world, the Kavon is Dira B'Tachtein, but has to be guided by light, because if not, we live in a dark world. So the purpose is to transform the material existence, the ego-centric universe, and the universe driven by self-interest, and recognize that it's really rooted in the Yesh Amiti, as he explains there in the Geras HaKedesh 20, that it's rooted in the Yesh Amiti, which is Atzmos itself, God Himself. But how reveals that, and how do we get there? That's through Eir, that's through the Shemesh, that reveals that power in the sun, in the moon. But the moon ultimately is the ultimate purpose. More, of course, can be said about this, but this is a brief nukud. Another additional element is the fact that Mishenichnas Oder Marben B'Simcha, as the Rebbe emphasizes, this year we have a double Oder. So the Marben B'Simcha, Mailam B'Kedesh, that we grow, is not 30 days, it's almost 59 days. Because we have the extra Oder. So 59 days of extra Simcha, and it begins. Now, why is there Simcha connected to the Oder? To the Shana Muberes, this additional Simcha? So on a basic level, you can say when you have a pregnant year, a year that compensates, and more than compensates, gives us extra time, extra lunar energy, that's a cause for joy. But it's also interesting, the paradox, that we know that the Rabbeim were actually concerned when it came to Shana Muberes. They saw that the Shana Muberes was a year of somewhat a little tentative, because Shana Muberes reminds us of the Miyut HaLavana, the diminishing of the moon. Remember, if the moon had not been diminished due to the Kitrug HaLavana, when the Lavana came and complained and said, you can't have one king with two crowns, so God said, Lech lechi umayti etzasmuch, go and diminish yourself. So the moon since then became a diminished entity, and that's exactly why we need to reconcile. So though reconciliation of the Ibriyar, of the Shana Muberes, of the leap year, is a powerful force, but it comes as a result of a Yerida. Chassidus explains that the Miyat HaLavona is connected to, before that, Shviras HaKelim, the shattering of the containers, the vessels. Before that, the Tzimtzum Arishin, the quantum black hole that shifted all of existence and allowed space for existence. And in turn, the Miyat HaLavona led to the Chet Tzadas, to the sin of the tree of knowledge. So on a year Shana Muberes, we're reminded of the pagam, of the blemish, of the flaw, of the deficiency that was caused by this kitrug, by this complaint of the moon. But in turn, like any type of Yerida Tzedek Aliyah, it turns out to be a second month. And Simcha, Ein Simcha Ka'ataras Asfekas, there's no joy as one that comes after doubt. So a Simcha that comes out of darkness, out of a potential darkness, a diminished moon that can lead to many problems. The diminished moon in Chassidus is seen as the root of darkness and difficulties. Tisha B'Av, that Arizal explains why Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, is such a great Simcha, compared to Yom Kippur, is because it comes after the Miyut Godel, the tremendous diminishing and diminishment of, and the you can say the violation of Malchus, the Beis Hamikdash, in the month of Av, which of course is equated with Adar, because just as we diminish in Simcha and Av, we add in Simcha and Adar. So in a way, this is the antithesis of Av. So when Malchus is diminished so much, it leads us to a far greater Simcha, like Chamisha Asabav, and Adar symbolizes that as well, the compensating and the reconciliation with the sun, and then it becomes even stronger than the sun. We have more years in Shana Muberes than we have in a solar year. As a result of the deficiency, teaching us that even a dark moment can be a catalyst and a springboard to far greater strength, which of course feeds right into the themes of that we discuss here, Chassidus Applied, My Life Chassidus Applied, how to apply these ideas of Torah and Chassidus to our personal lives. So the Shana Muberes and the other, the Simcha, Peretz Geder. Dafka Simcha is Peretz Geder. Regular routine behavior does not pierce barriers, does not lead us to a transcendent state. That's routine and pattern. Other leads us to a transcendent state, and not just on Purim, but the whole month becomes Nepachu, transformed. Purim also is a transformation from darkness to light, and any type of transformation from a dark state creates catapults us into a joy that's beyond any limit, Ad lo yada. And here we have the 2 months of others, so it all ties together and allows us to experience this and apply it to our personal lives. Okay, let us move now. Firstly, some follow-up and some new topics, some that I didn't have the time to address, and hopefully we can address them all today. Okay, so let us begin with a follow-up to Kabbalah sale. So if you recall 2 episodes back, episode 100, I read some, I would say, not such complimentary responses to my presentation. And I'm very proud to say that I read that, because I definitely want to hear from everyone. I want to hear everybody's position and opinion, even though, as I said then, it's a little unfair when you don't know who's writing and you know who I am, because people can end up writing things that not necessarily they would write if they were signing their name. But this is anonymous, so you feel free to do so. But I want to follow up, and I'm not going to read those letters because I did that then. I'll read the follow-up letters. Kabbalah sale feedback. Which is responding to some of that critique that I read then. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, every week for the last 100 weeks, I have drunk with thirst the entirety of each of your episodes of Chassidus Applied. I hope you will find it fitting to read this letter and comment on it, as it addresses, in my humble opinion, the very core and purpose of these weekly episodes. I was quite disturbed by the writer who wrote to you concerning Kabbalah sale, suggesting in essence that the first approach to all issues anyone may bring up as a question before providing explanations or motivation is accept the yoke of heaven and do as you are told. Only then, the writer suggested, is one ready to hear explanations, as they will provide pnimius, internalization. What was meant by pnimius was not explained by your critic. In addition to your reply, I would suggest the questioner contradicts the 41st chapter of Tanya. He makes a huge mistake that many educators have made in the past, and as I shall point out later, we are now paying the price. Let us read carefully what the authority of the Hasidic definition of Kabbalah Sale has to say on the matter. Here is what I believe to be an accurate paraphrasing of the beginning of chapter 41 of Tanya. Though we have spent 40 chapters promoting the notion that the various modalities of reverence before Hashem provide the bedrock, imperative that motivates us to keep far from doing wrong, and though we have spent 40 chapters promoting the notion that the various modalities of passion relationship with Hashem generate the bedrock imperative that drives us to do what is right, nevertheless, generating passion alone leaves us still wanting. And as the Alter Rebbe will say on page Nun Zayin in chapter 41, there needs to be a constant dual awareness. At the very least, one needs to meditate how God, who is everywhere, is right here, watching my every move and motivation, and is relying upon me to fulfill my unique role as his servant with precision. End quote. Thus far, I have paraphrased only page Nun Vav. On page Nun Zayin, the Alter Rebbe clarifies, and I paraphrase, quote, serving Hashem with passion alone is missing effort, otherwise called avodah. For his is driven by personal passion. Therefore, concurrent with passion, one needs to induce the utter awe of God's omnipresence, outlined above. In this manner, one is at the same time behaving as a son of Hashem, namely the loving passion relationship, and at the same time behaving as a servant of Hashem, the reverential role. The Kabbalah Sale the Alter Rebbe is describing here is absolutely not the attitude of just shut your mind and do as you are told. To make it very easy to appreciate it, let us picture someone working for the Rebbe. He or she is not acting in mindless obedience. Rather, he or she feels privileged to toil upon the Rebbe's agenda, even when he or she is utterly exhausted and filled with worries, etc. And in the ideal form, parallel to what the Alter Rebbe says about serving Hashem, concurrent to acting as Eved Avram Anechi, he or she still has passion for the specifics of the Rebbe's agenda, especially since the Rebbe has explained it to us and injected and saturated everything we do with meaning. With this reading of Perek Mem Aleph, it is easy to see why the Alter Rebbe did not simply write on page 1, have Kabbalah Sale and do as you are told. After that, we will discuss passion. The chronology that led up to this series of Chassidus Applied, now having passed 100 episodes, viewed and listened by some 1,500 plus people at the very least each week, came about as evidenced by the letters read in several of the earliest episodes. By the big stick, do as you are told, and passion and understanding is none of your concern version of Kabbalah Sale. I believe we all remember the debacle, I think is pronounced, of, I will not mention the rabbi's name, regarding the COTS, the call of the shofar, where our own people went looking for something that they should have received from Chassidus. But instead were raised with the big Kabbalah Sale stick of Azeyu nicht anders. And that is where we were supposed to park our minds and be obedient. After that great debacle, thank Hashem, along came Rabbi Jacobson to show our happiness, passion, meaning, and even answers to our most pressing and complex issues are to be found in Chassidus. So in addition to what you said, among other things in reply to the questioner, it is not so black and white. I suggest that the Alter Rebbe explicitly disagrees with the attitude of that questioner. And thank you for injecting meaning and passion first. And once we have that, we will worry about what the Alter Rebbe, waiting for 41 chapters to point out, have all the passion, but concurrent, meditated daily, that God is right here watching expectantly that you fulfill your individual role for his plan. And to all listeners who know of the expression mentioned in the previous Rebbe's writings, Azoya Nishtandis, I simply say to you, do you think that the occasions that expression is used, and I am assuming you recall the context, do you think they contradict Tanya Perek Aleph, 41 rather, Tanya Mem Aleph, Tanya chapter 4:1? Obviously not. Rabbi Jacobson, allow me to be daring here. Perhaps those who live only in the world of Azeyo Nisht Anders, let me translate that for those. Azeyo Nisht Anders is like this and no other way. A very type of rigid approach. Have not yet entered the zone of having an emotional relationship with Hashem. In spite of reading God's wishes daily in the Shema to cite but one quote, that we be in love with him. Once again, thanks so much for quenching the thirst of all of us loyal and grateful listeners. Okay. As I read those, this speaks for itself. Let me read Kabbalah Sale feedback too. I would answer to the one who wrote about your humility that it seems the question is based on people questioning the Rebbe, and this bothers that person, which means that this person doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't fully comprehend that the Rebbe makes no mistakes. The Rebbe is Moshe Rabbeinu, and as the Gemara says, Kol ha'emer David chata eina el teya. Anyone who says that David sinned, which of course also applies to Moshe, is only making a mistake. Is but making a mistake. So we must know is making a mistake. So we must know that whatever the Rebbe says or does is directly from Hashem. Hence there is no wrong and no mistake. As I heard the story that the Rebbe told Rabbi Gutnick to go to a Telz reunion and report back, so he came back in Yechidus and read a report from his pocket notebook. But the last point he didn't want to say, so the Rebbe reached over the desk and took the notebook from his hand. The question was, why doesn't the Rebbe discuss his ideas, miftzayim, etc., with other gedolim before he comes out with them? The Rebbe responded, there's no one to talk to. Furthermore, I recall seeing in Chitrik or Prelov's Sipurim that one of the Rabbeim once said, by uns is nita shikha. By us we do not have memory loss. We don't have forgetfulness. So fully appreciate that you have to totally understand, really understand what a Rebbe Nasi Adar, his Pastusa de Moshe is. Without such a recognition, there's no one to talk to answer those questions. It thus follows that one who is representing and digesting the Rebbe's Torah is usually also right, unless he misunderstood the Rebbe. Nevertheless, there can still be and is disagreement amongst Chassidim, and even big Chassidim on how to interpret certain cryptic things. And that will always be, so a person has a choice of what type of mashpia to connect to. Now, to answer their complaint, the bulk of your certainty comes right out of the Rebbe's Torah. So you are comfortable with that knowledge and see no need to back down unless it's factually proven that this is not the Rebbe's position. When you use your own interpretations to take on matters that the Rebbe does not clearly address, you are still guided by this general outlook of being steeped in the Rebbe's Torah. So that certainly flows from there. Now, on matters of disagreement, I also don't agree with a small percentage of what you say. For example, our last correspondence and your final say on that about the shidduchim for BTs, that you said what I wrote was infuriating. But just because you disagree with me does not mean you lack humility. And I hear where you're coming from, but I still disagree, but we can still be friends who agree to disagree. Maybe you do lack humility, but I would not be able to ascertain that from a video 1 hour a week. So I will leave that for those who know you much more personally. Again, it seemed this person was bothered more by your certainty than your actual midas. And I suspect such people love to wallow in uncertainty, etc. Okay. And feedback number 3. Not to love to be undone, we have yet another feedback. Thank you for your inspiring weekly lessons. They are both enlightening and enjoyable at the same time. I am especially impressed with the way you handle critique and even go ahead and read it out loud. I've yet to see anyone do that, as it certainly opens the door for the listeners to think critically about your presentation, which I don't think you seem to mind. But after last week's class, which you opened with 2 critical remarks, I'm sure you understand that it may have got some people thinking about those remarks. For starters, I would like to comment on the first one, which was about Kabbalah Sale in the teachings of Chabad. Now, while I don't underestimate the respect you have for this idea, while I don't underestimate the respect you have for this idea, and like you said, it certainly has been mentioned quite a few times in your classes, at the same time, I will admit that I myself have been wondering about this a number of times. You compared the simplicity of Kabbalah Sale to the idea of Gamva apum Rachmona Gamva. Well, this is written incorrectly here. Maybe it's backwards. Gamva apum achtot Rachmona Karya is the expression. A Gana, before he goes out to steal, but pum is before, he prays to Hashem. As if the reason for the thief, the thief does not hold himself back from stealing is because he's only using the idea of Kabbalah Sale. Now that seems to contradict, Now what seems so contradicting about this is that the very essence of a thief stealing is a total contradiction to the whole concept of Kabbalah Sale. Because it would be accepting any yoke of God. He obviously would not be, because if he was accepting any yoke of God, he obviously would not be transgressing on this commandment. So I think it first has to be put into proper perspective. The idea that accepting the yoke of God clearly means fulfilling every single one of the commandments without fail. The idea behind a thief's reasoning, which is explained in Chassidus often, is the fact that he has the knowledge about God's wishes, but did not internalize them, which is the fundamental difference between pnimi and makif, internal and somewhat removed. Stealing or transgressing any Hashem's commandments is a direct opposite and the greatest contradiction to the idea of Kabbalah sale. But now, like I said, being that you open the door to expressing feelings which that writer expressed, I would like to discuss my feelings about this as well. I feel that although the Rebbe did teach us to be very tolerant and to educate others in a manner which they feel they have the right to question, challenge, and contradict what we teach them, like the note I read from the Rebbe a few weeks ago, yet, as you mentioned 2 weeks ago very clearly, yes, and I would actually very appreciate if you let us know where we could see a copy of that note from the Rebbe. I don't think that is in any way a contradiction to being clear about what is right and what is wrong. A child or a student, or anyone for that matter, was open to hearing an answer to any given question. Is always a route to be told in a frenzy or kind manner that our Rabbeim, as well as our Shulchan Aruch, gives a clear ruling about that, and still feel that he has a right to question it, challenge it, or even contradict it. But I certainly can't say that I understand and feel like the writer who said that the element of certainty is missing in some of the answers you give. I actually agree with you that many people cannot be influenced with clear answers, and I'm sure your experience has shown that you're better off giving understanding instead. But being that this class, I would assume, is being followed mostly by Chassidish Yidden, it may actually be to their disadvantage to not hear a clear existing ruling which may give the mistaken, vague impression. Thank you again for the opportunity both to express my opinion and for everything that you do for me and the general public. It is truly to be admired how serious you take your mission of Afotzes Hamayonis. May you be a continuous inspiration to all for many healthy years to come. Amen. Okay. So I gave it time because this was a big topic, people writing, and I felt I want to read in full context exactly what these people write. If you have further comments, please go to meaningfullife.com/mylife. There's an anonymous forum. Everyone can write there completely anonymously on this or any topic. So it's an opportunity just to mention that. Okay. Now, with that read, let's go to a new topic, which is a personal one for myself, but I believe fascinating for me, and I'm sure fascinating to anyone interested in the Rebbe. So, as you may know, many of you may know, that I began my career as a chayzer and a maniach. Career, quote unquote, if you can call it a career. What's a chayzer? A chayzer literally comes from the word chazara, to repeat. And on Shabbos and Yom Tov, when no recordings were made and no notes were taken, we had to remember, absorb, retain what the Rebbe said, and then after Shabbos on Yom Tov, put it down on paper. And the next step was a maniach. A maniach meant, a hanocha meant placing it. Hanocha means to place something. In this case, committing and placing the ideas on paper and publishing these words. Not every chayzer was a maniach, not every maniach was a chayzer. Some people were very good writers. Some were people who remembered. There were the few that were also able to do both. I had the schus to do both these things. Just for the record, I began officially writing Farbrengens, Shabbos Chanukah, Tovshin Mem, which would be the end of 1979, and did so, thank God, for the years all the way till the Rebbe's stroke, and Shabbos Parsha Vayakel would be the last Farbrengen that we heard from the Rebbe till this date, Tovshin Nun Beis. So that would mean approximately 13, 14 years. But I was already helping and assisting in Chazorah and in Anochis a few years before that when I came to 770 in Tovshin Lamed Vov. That would be 1976. And that's when I got also involved in Sefer Alakutim, which is another discussion, not for now, the encyclopedia, the Tzemach Tzedek, that the Rebbe initiated Nittel night, Tovshin Lamed Zayin, the end of 1976. But going back to Chayzer Maniach, so therefore as such, I've been asked the questions that people have been asking, especially recently, it seems because we recently posted on HebrewBooks.org, was posted all the Sichos Anochos that came out after Tovshin Mem Beis, 1982. Till in Sichos Kodesh, the set of Sichos Kodesh, those large volumes, has all the Sichos from Tovshin Yud till Tovshin Mem Aleph, which means 1981. But Mem Beis and on have not really been published in books, except a few books that cover some of them. So recently, for Yud Shvat, the people at HebrewBooks.org and other places helped post that. So as a result, we received this following question. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for making these sichos available. I hope in honor of this Gilui, It's revelation. You can spend some time in your weekly Chassidus applied talk to discuss the making and writing of these Hanochas. For example, here are some of the questions I have always wanted to know about. What was the process from Chazorah to writing? In other words, from reviewing to the writing process. How did it develop over the years? Was there an effort to keep to the Rebbe's words verbatim, or was the intent to make the Sikha formulated for the written form? Why did the Rebbe start editing more of his talks in the later years? Did Dvar Hanochas Atmim and Lahak do Chazorah separately? Referring to Dvar Hanochas Atmim was the organization that I headed and continued to head that documented the Sikhs in the Rebbe's language, which is Yiddish. The Rebbe spoke in Yiddish. Lahak, which was founded, I believe, in 1982, was to make available these Sikhs translated into a language of Hebrew for those that were not Yiddish speaking and those that can only understand it in Hebrew. So the questioner is asking, did we do Chazorah separately? Did we review the Farbrengen separately? If the Sikhs in Yiddish and Hebrew are not identical, how do we understand that? Now that I think of it, these questions and many others that others will have may take up a whole entire episode. Perhaps it deserves one, maybe a special edition in honor of the special collection, the Sikhs from 1982 and on, not to interfere with the people who are waiting for guidance at the regular time. Well, no, I think it's valuable enough, and let us address it. Another question came in regarding this. You mentioned you were going to discuss the writing of the Sikhs. I look forward to this topic, as this is something you are uniquely qualified to talk about. Could you please discuss if the Hanochas, whether in Hebrew, especially in Yiddish, were word for word, or what the Rebbe said? That means if someone had a copy of the Hanocha, again, Hanocha is the published version of the talk, and were transported back to the Farbrengen at which the Hanocha was said, i.e. the Shabbos or Yontiv, not weekday work, where the Hanochas were made from a tape, would they be able to follow along with what the Rebbe is saying? In other words, how close is the Hanocha to what the Rebbe actually said? Okay. There seems to be accepted view that the Yiddish Hanochas, e.g., example from Sichos Kodesh, were made almost verbatim from what the Rebbe said, what people called Lashon Harav. Is this true? Another question, why is it that the Rebbe's Hagos on the Sichos, both the Hanochas that were Muge and Likutei Sichos, are not more publicly available? There are a few Avrechim with a website, a few individuals with a website, hagos.com, that collect the Rebbe's Hagos edits on the Sichos when they are published. Although there is a lot there, it would seem that from the Rebbe's Torah there should be much more. Do you think it is valuable to learning a Sicha to have the insight that comes from the Rebbe's edits? Chazak v'amatz on the weekly classes. Okay, so let's address this. I'll try to address it with the time limits, and if we need to elaborate more, I'll do that in future episodes. It's impossible to really convey, especially in brief, the whole process from beginning to end, especially the challenge of remembering, which of course is the big question. How do you remember hours of Farbrengens? And they were hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. When Simchas Torah was on a Friday, there was a Farbrengen Thursday night, there was a Farbrengen Friday evening, there was a Farbrengen Shabbos early afternoon, a Farbrengen late afternoon, all unrecorded. So you can imagine the challenges involved. But I will talk more about the actual process. So, firstly, we have directives from the Rebbe of how to write. The Rebbe did not want a verbatim, word for word. Even when we had a tape, he did not want that to be published, because the written word and the spoken word are not exactly the same. If you took a tape from the Rebbe and you typed up word for word, yes, you'd have every word, but there'd be no paragraphs, there'd be no commas, there'd be no sentences, there'd be no periods. If you really went technically, because the Rebbe didn't stop, in a sense, here's a paragraph break. So just on a basic level, it needs to be structured in a way that people can read it. I wrote a Hanocha early in my career, so to speak, in Tov Shin Mem. It was a Shabbos Farbrengen, Parsha Boy Tov Shin Mem, and the Rebbe began editing it, the beginning of it, and then wrote on top, he stopped editing, he wrote Reshima Milulis Mamish Kamoy HaTape. It's a document that Reshima means another word for Hanocha, a way of jotting down. Reshima means to mark down, to write down. Milulis, word for word, verbatim. Mamish Kamoy HaTape, exactly like a tape. Now you'd think that's a compliment, right? That you could write a Farbrengen Shabbos and it's mamish like a tape, word for word. But the Rebbe was not writing it as a compliment. He was writing that it's not worthy for publication. So it may be accurate in the words the Rebbe said, but it's not readable, basically. So bottom line is, anyone unfamiliar with writing knows, even when you write and you're writing accurately exactly what the Rebbe is saying, written word has to be adjusted. Now, what means adjusted? Adjusted in the prose, in the style, in the presentation, not in the content, God forbid. So the key thing here was, how do you convey the exact ideas and as close as possible to the words of the Rebbe, but in a written form. Now, of course, when there was a sikha the Rebbe didn't edit, we were even more careful to make sure that it's as close as possible. When the Rebbe edited, obviously we could take a little more liberty, because the Rebbe would look it over and agree or disagree and edit it. But the bottom line is, nothing could be verbatim because that's not readable. On the other hand, yes, we were as close as possible, and there's no question, we worked very hard in sticking to the Rebbe's actual language. The actual language was the way the Rebbe said things, because even when you create structure, which is paragraphs, sentences, and so on, even when you create a certain order, where the Rebbe may sometimes go over an idea and elaborate more, so in writing you combine and consolidate it, even then, worked very, very hard to obviously express in the Rebbe's way and try to capture the original as much as possible, that's humanly possible by human beings. So that's number one in answering the questions about the verbatim and now the process was that Shabbos the Rebbe would speak, or Yontif. I can tell you right now, my memory begins to fade immediately. So it's critical that right after the Sikha, you review the whole thing in your mind, not just general ideas, but the whole flow. You make a certain mental roadmap of the ideas. When the Rebbe would, let's say, shift and go off on a tangent or go to another subject, you made a mental signpost to make sure you're following along. And then after this, by the niggin, I would always go over in my mind. If you don't do that, you start forgetting. And we do that as many times as possible. An interesting phenomenon is you don't remember what was originally said, you remember what was said. So basically your mind is constantly making copies when you continue to review it. If you just would listen to the Farbrengen and not review it and wait till Shabbos is over, those few hours, you would no longer have that same impression. So the mind, by reviewing it immediately, you get that impression, and then you do it again and again. I would do it at least 3-4 times from the time Shabbos was, from the time of the Sikha, then after the Farbrengen, then we'd go to my home, and we would chazer, a group of us, just going over the whole Farbrengen again. I probably would go over it once more, depending whether Shabbos was a short Shabbos or a long Shabbos. And then after Shabbos, we'd come together, Rabbi being the Chezer Rashi, which means the veteran, the senior Chezer who was there from the beginning, Tafshin Yud, who I learned, and I'm indebted to him in so many ways. He was the one that's sort of like the pioneer, in a way, of writing Hanachas. Then we'd come together, Chazar in 770. In the earlier years was upstairs in 770, later years was downstairs. And we would review it. There would be a group of 20, 30 Bochrim, or whoever wanted to participate. It was open forum. Sometimes Rabbi would chazer it. In my year, sometimes I would chazer. And people would pipe in, and everyone would say, the Rebbe said this, and someone said, he said it later, he said it earlier. Sometimes something, when we were ready by this, reviewing the second Sikha, someone said, hey, I think I remember something from the first Sikha. And we would jot down notes, either I would or somebody would jot down everything that was said by Chazara. And this was really just, for the first time, putting on paper the points. And that the Chazara would take an hour or 2 hours or whatever it was, depending on the length of the Farbrengen. And now we had something on paper which was just not even a draft. It was just pure notes from what was said. Very often after Chazara, I'd remember a whole piece that was not remembered by Chazara. Then there were people I would call, there were different individuals who were very good. Some people remembered phrases well, some people remembered the understanding, the Havana well, some people just remembered words and didn't understand what they were saying, what the Rebbe was saying. So different people were able to complement, and slowly you build up that initial draft, initial picture. Then it's usually Sunday morning, and I'd probably not go to sleep Motzai Shabbos because sleep is also a killer of memory, subtly. So by Sunday morning I would begin to research with the ideas that Rebbe spoke about, because when you start seeing them inside, in Torah Eir, Likutei Torah, and Gemara, and Rambam, and so on, you suddenly realize that Rebbe said something, but it was brief. It was a brief summary of a whole inyan. And that brought alive even more the ideas. And around Sunday afternoon, I would begin writing. Writing meaning now taking the research, plus the notes that were taken. I usually make notes for myself, create a structure to understand. And interesting, like Siddur says about Yesh, Ayin, and Yesh, though at the Farbrengen you could understand something, then later, once you start reviewing it and researching, you usually get very confused, and all the details seem to completely be overwhelming. But slowly the picture starts emerging again as you begin to own, so to speak, and really understand what the Rebbe meant. And that's when I begin writing Sunday afternoon. A hanocha, depending, the Rebbe's rate of speaking was that every hour of speaking on recording, which was on a recording, was yielded 28.5 by 11 double-spaced pages. So a Farbrengen, let's say a 4-hour Shabbos Farbrengen, a perfect version would be 80 pages, 4 hours of speaking. So we were quite good, I must say, and we were able to get from a 4-hour Farbrengen 78 pages, 79 pages without redundancy. So depending on the length of the Farbrengen, that's how long it took us. I would usually finish the first draft by Wednesday, Tuesday. Later years, because of the edits, the Rebbe's Bagia, I would finish by Tuesday. Tuesday night was the deadline. And while I was working on it, I would give the first typed. I used to use a typewriter until 1982, which is another story. When we got the first computer in Lubavitch, and we had entire correspondence with the Rebbe about this, which I'll share another time. Then what we did was I would give the sikha that was typed up to Rabbi, if he was available, or others that would review it, and they would make their pen marks. Then I would take it and consolidate it. And once it was a final version, and Mara McCamus footnotes were added by different people on the staff. Rabbi, my cousin, Rabbi Aaron Leib Raskin, was working with me already in Tavshim Amalef, 1981. There were other times different colleagues that worked on that. Then we would give it to a typist to type the final version. Once computers came around, obviously the word processor sped up the process. And that was the process. That, in many cases, the Rebbe did not edit it, so we published the booklet. There were times when the Rebbe actually edited the booklet afterwards, but I'm not going now into editing. It's a whole different discussion because of time limits. This was the general process. Just want to cover the main questions that were asked to me about this. Let me make sure I cover everything. About the verbatim, about Chazar. No, there was no two separate Chazaras. There was one Chazara. The people from Chanoch Satmim were there, people from Lahak, people from other people. It was one Chazara we all participated in, and that was where everybody got the information together. Over the years, how it developed? Well, in the early years, I've heard the stories. Rabbi and some of the older Chassidim would get together, and they developed it. And there was always a few people helping. I know my Shver Olav Shalom worked with Rabbi. I know Raheshka Debravsky later years and others. And we're not discussing now the Likutei Sichos, which is a whole different parsha. Let's see what else can we say here. Why the Rebbe started editing in later years? For two reasons that I always assume. Number one was because we were writing better. It took less time of the Rebbe to fix our mistakes. Number two, because it was being published and being spread far further through the newspapers, through the Allgemeine Journal, through Kfar Chabad, through fax, and so on. And that, to me, was always the reason that there may be many other reasons, but those were the two main reasons. The fact that there were sikhs sometimes in Yiddish and the Hebrew translation were not identical. So the maskir once asked the Rebbe, one of the Rebbe's secretaries, Rabbi Groner, asked the Rebbe this question, and the Rebbe said, this was especially when the Rebbe edited the sikhs, both versions in the beginning of Tavshim Mem Zayin, from I believe from Noach through Vayechi, you have two versions of a number of Farbrengens. So the Rebbe said, it's two from Shivim Ponim L'Teira. Two versions of 70, meaning different students here, the Rebbe. Technically, 70 people could have written 70 different type of anochas. Not different mechek mizrach l'mayrev, from east to west, but nuances different. Because the Rebbe is speaking. Remember, Shmai Avtalion spoke, and Shammai heard Gvura, Asr, and Hillel heard Mutter, leniency. So the Rebbe speaking, Teira could be heard in different ways. Okay. What else can I add to this? Let me see. Yeah, I think that really sums up the process. Because of time, Blineda will talk more about this. If you have more questions, I'm happy to discuss. This is my lifeblood. This is what I did day and night for many, many years. Unbelievable schus. And I didn't discuss how the Rebbe edited and when he edited and how he edited. We'll discuss that hopefully next week. And especially if more questions come in, I will address that as well. Okay. And share some anecdotes, interesting anecdotes of all the years of working, because you can imagine we had a constant correspondence with the Rebbe, thousands of pages of correspondence that the Rebbe answered, edited, critiqued, and so on, which we had the honor to have. The question was asked also why they're not publicized more. This I'll also leave for a future discussion, hopefully next week. Okay, writing 6. Let's move on now to the next question. All right. First allegiance in marriage. What takes precedence in marriage, one's spouse or parents and siblings? The Rebbe states that our first allegiance for a successful marriage is our spouse. Can you please elaborate on this? From our understanding, this means that each partner cannot put their parents, children, brothers, and sisters before their spouse. Well, firstly, the common sense of it is quite obvious. In life, relationships are beautiful, but you have to have an order of priority. When children are in their parents' home, young age, who controls their lives, for good or for bad, now hopefully it's always for good, is their parents. Because the children are not yet self-sufficient and are incapable of taking care of themselves. So parents, nurturing parents, protect the children, walk them, hold their hand, physically, metaphorically, send them to school, and deal with their challenges and issues. There comes a point where we cut the umbilical cord in more ways than one. That's the nature of the way God created. Al-Kain Yazav Adam as Beisei. We leave our homes in a good way. Healthy parents embrace that. We have to build our own home, just like our parents did. So now when you're going to build another home with another adult, it's called your spouse, there's a reason that you're building this home, because you are now blessed. Your parents did their job. They've infused you. So healthy parents, halachically, chassidish, and how the Rebbe definitely emphasizes, the Rebbe has to emphasize it because some people are confused or don't have the right boundaries. Now you're building the home with your spouse. And your first priority is your spouse, the home, and your children. Your parents want to weigh in. There are ways to do it. If they're healthy, there are ways to do it without meddling. But now that's what it comes down to. So if there is a conflict, and your parents tell you one thing, and your spouse says another, you have to go with your spouse. And healthy parents should tell you to go speak to your spouse. Because the last thing you want is a battle where your parents or siblings are pulling you one direction, your spouse another direction. Many shalom bayis issues are a result of this not being handled properly, on both ends. Now, an intelligent spouse that sees that parents or siblings are meddling would also, in a way, not make the problems more exacerbated, and would talk to her spouse or his spouse and say, you know something, let's settle down here, let's figure out what to do. So we all have to be like adults. But often, big mistakes are made, and you see this in the Rebbe's letters time and again, that where parents and siblings, with all good intentions, meddle and affect and create tensions and create friction that is unnecessary. So first and foremost, we must have these boundaries in place. The parents had their chance when they brought up their children. Now you have to let your children bring up their children. You cannot replace them. Now, if parents feel, and we discussed this in previous episodes, that their children are incompetent or literally a danger to their grandchildren, so to speak, it's another story. Go talk to Mashpia, go to, as I'd say, to the grandparents or the siblings. Go talk to Mashpia, go talk to a doctor and see if it's accurate. Maybe you're not right. And that would again be undermining. If you are right, there are ways to deal with that as well. But we all have to have a measure of bittul, and absolutely the Rebbe's approach, which is not the Rebbe's approach, I would say. It's not some chiddush the Rebbe was mechadish and deir ashvi, that you have to defer to your spouse rather than your parents. It's complete common sense. And when you look in Torah, there's a Torah way of dealing with things. That's how it works. No. So that briefly is the explanation of it, and I think that's enough suffices for now. In talking already this topic, there's been a follow-up to the parenting issues. Parenting issues. So let's review that. In follow-up to previous episodes' discussion about regret over parenting mistakes, we got several questions. And one of them was titled 8 out of 9 not frum, meaning their children. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, your weekly webcasts uplift and inspire me. What a difference this initiative is making in Lubavitch. And I hope also outside of Lubavitch. I just wanted to comment on a letter that you read from the broken-hearted mother whose children are not frum, quote-unquote. I'm glad of their quote and unquote because we know that word is a very loaded word. It's my own commentary. This applies to her and all parents in a similar situation. I feel that it is important to remember that not always are the parents to blame. So many factors are involved. The school, friends, and most of all, the immoral and selfish society that we live in. It is a huge issue. In every Jewish group, every family, FFB, BT, FFB for those that know it means from birth. BT means Baal Tshuva. Loving, and these are euphemisms I don't really use, but since the writer is writing it, I just translated it. Loving and amazing parents together with the not so great ones. So these are all the factors that are involved. Of course, as parents, we need to try our best to be good examples and give our children a love for Hashem and Yiddishkeit. But if we did that to the best of our ability, who said you are to blame? Especially that you mentioned that you have a loving relationship with your children. Please allow me one more point. This is meant for those still with children at home. It is so important to make sure that Yiddishkeit is made to be fun, special, exciting. I know kids who felt like Yiddishkeit is all about restrictions and stress. Make your home a fun place. Make Yom Tovim and Shabbos unforgettable. Make simpler food if you need to in order so that you are not stressed out. The kids feel it. If you resent preparing for Shabbos and Yom Tov, it comes through. It's not an easy task, but we can try our best. Thank you for reading. I just read, actually from my cousins, the Rebbetzin once told them, the cousins, two girls, the Rebbetzin told them that they should enjoy life. Yes, Chassidus teaches us to enjoy life. Now, of course, that has to be understood in context. It doesn't mean to enjoy things that are, God forbid, inappropriate. But it means the upbeat attitude of having a positive attitude to life. And having that attitude is absolutely, and I second that last point you made. Question 2, power versus influence. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for giving us so much time to answer all of our questions. How can I influence my kids instead of just overpowering them? How can I create a positive connection with them that inspires them to follow what I'm telling and teaching them? And how do I create a comfortable environment? Okay, let me respond to that. I think it's pretty obvious that any type of overpowering attitude is usually not, even if short-term you can justify it, long-term does not have much benefits. There's nothing like influencing someone through inspiration, through kindness, through love, through an example. So I think, without getting into the specifics case by case, generically speaking, you have to make it fun, like the previous writer wrote. You have to do things and show them the excitement of something in an inspirational way instead of based on rules and punishment and fear. It's as simple as that. It's identifying your child's skills, your child's interests, and harnessing them, directing them toward good ends. This takes work, this takes effort, but who better equipped to do this than a parent who loves their child so much? I just read a note from the Rebbe someone's asking the Rebbe, how do you build betochen atzmi, self-confidence, and a cheshek, and a pleasure, and a desire, cheshek in Aveda, which means a inspired work. So the Rebbe answers that you should meditate on 2 points. That every person is a shluchis shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is a messenger of God to radiate and illuminate the world. 2, that chinuch b'nei Yisrael, educating Jews today, is pekuach nefesh mamish. It's a matter of life and death. Ubetach to'el anat. When you meditate on these 2 things, it'll definitely help. That's how we have to look. We have to make our children feel, not just make them feel, this is the truth, that they're indispensable. They have an important role to play. Feel responsible in that way. Far, far better than through scolding or through reprimanding. Obviously, discipline is necessary when it's necessary. But you're asking about how to do that, you have to have that attitude. Now, if you yourself don't have that attitude, that may be a challenge. That's why we need mashpiyim. We need people, how we build an attitude that's positive, that we can then convey and pass on to our children. Obviously, you can only create a comfortable environment if you are comfortable in your own skin. If you're not, that's something you must address. Address in 2 ways. First of all, how you can become more comfortable, and secondly, how that shouldn't impact the way you're bringing up your home and education. And I think the previous writer, not being stressed, doing things in a more calm way, in a more relaxed way, is a tremendous tool. Children need a calm environment. Stress is like a war zone. Battles. These are things that are toxic and extremely hurtful, especially to children. Adults could perhaps immunize themselves to that. But we all know, you go into a place where you feel irritation in the air, friction, tension, anxiety, it affects us all in a negative way. Now, there's one more question in this category, but because of time, I will leave it to the next episode. Let us go now to the Chassidus question of the week, and then to the essays. Okay, Chassidus question of the week will be called the force of gravity. It's a follow-up question, but I thought it appropriate because it touches upon something which I think will be very fascinating to us all, how Chassidus looks at gravity. A few weeks ago, you discussed the Alter Rebbe's second chapter of Shara Yichud Va'amuna, speaking about creation ex nihilo, Yesh Ma'ayin. There, the distinction is made between water, chapter 2 in Shara Yichud Va'amuna, whose nature is to descend. So there, the distinction is made between water, whose nature is to descend, falls, and a stone wall, where the Alter Rebbe says there, a stone wall that whose nature is seemingly not to fall downward. It can stand upright without any additional wind. My two questions are, isn't everything in this world subject to the force of gravity, independent of the specific item? How then can the Alter Rebbe refer to the nature of water to descend as a separate creation? Because that's the point there. He says that this water, this nature, according to the Rebbe's Taich, according to Rabbi Hillel's Taich, he's referring to the nature of the water standing. The Rebbe teaches that it refers to the water falling, that too is a creation. Everything is subject to gravity, the questioner is asking. 2, related, even a stone wall will descend if the lower stones aren't placed flatly and balanced so they hold up the stones above. If the Alter Rebbe is saying that water's nature is to descend, surely the nature of stones is to descend as well. The carefully placed stones in the wall don't descend only because they're balanced, and maybe even have substance gluing them together. Would the Alter Rebbe have doubted that the force of gravity exists? Can you please explain? So, without going into the head of the questioner, I use this as an opportunity to broaden the topic. Firstly, I'm not sure what is bothering you. I speak to the questioner. The Alter Rebbe is saying the following, as we discussed that. He's looking in existence, in history, we find Kriyas Yamsuf, that the Eibishter sent a wind that held up the water all night long. So if And he says, and though the water's nature is to fall, there's also Yesh Ma'ayin, and still the Eibishter made a wind to hold it up. So how much more so Yesh Ma'ayin, something that's completely new. That's what the Alter Rebbe's Kal V'chemer there is. So here we're talking about something that's nature is to fall, and the Eibishter holds it up, you need a wind, so how much more so? So the fact that let's go with the approach, there is gravity. So you could say there's 3 elements here. There's the creation of water. There's the creation of the power of gravity, that everything is subject to gravity. And then there's the creation that water is pulled down by gravity unless you have something that holds it up. And stones, yes, though they would fall, but the fact of the matter is you can erect a wall and the stones don't fall. So there's a distinction. Even though stones are impacted by gravity, we see this all the time. You can put stone. Water, you can't do anything to make water stand. No matter what you do, you can't glue it together and you can't place it on top of each other as you suggest with stones. So the only way to do it is through a miracle of sending a wind that keeps it up. So that's what Alter Rebbe's Kal V'chemer is. Stones, on the other hand, don't have that issue. There you don't need a special wind. They stand because we see this all the time. We see buildings that stand, we see walls that stand, and so on. Whatever the way, they don't need a special effort. That's what Alter Rebbe is saying, making that distinction. So I'm not really clear what the problem is in that context. On the other hand, you could also argue that maybe the Alter Rebbe is not referring, gravity may not be something that the Alter Rebbe is embracing. And then, of course, the issue is not relevant here, because it's not the topic. The topic is the water falling flat or the water standing, which is that this teva, there's also a second creation. As I said, a second creation as a result of which, that even though it's a second creation, a teva sheni, and even that needs a koyach to keep it going. How much more so, teva rishon, a creation of something yesh ma'ayin. So you could also argue that the gravity is not a factor here. Why do I mention that? Because there's a classic maimer from the Alter Rebbe, which is cited briefly in Hayom Yom on Yud Dalet Tammuz, the 14th of Tammuz. This is a maimer that the Alter Rebbe said, or a Dvar Teira, the Alter Rebbe said, on the 3rd day of Pashas Bolok, Tov Kuf Samach Beis. Tov Kuf Samach Beis, which would be basically, Alter Rebbe was installed Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, which was 1812. This would be 10 years old. A year earlier, that's 1802. So as I said, cited in Hayom Yom, and this is printed, this maimer is printed by Mori Admur Azok and Tov Kuf Samach Beis, page 293. In addition, now we have volume 2 of Tov Kuf Samach Beis. We have other versions of it. In the second volume of Tov Kuf Samach Beis by Mori Admur Azok, page 475 and on. Interestingly, the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, cites this maimer in a letter that he writes to the Rebbe, where the Rebbe asks him a question about that he heard that Matan Torah did not happen in America. So this letter is printed in Sefer Mamorim Tafshin Ches, page 235. The whole history behind it. And basically there, the Alter Rebbe asked the question, why is it, I'll read exactly the actual question. He says like this. To ask the question of the astronomers, since the earth is round and like an apple, Lama Einim Neiflim, why do the people who are on the other end of the earth, in America, we are here on this hemisphere, why do the people in America not fall off the earth? If you have something that's round and those that are standing on top are on top, the people on the bottom would fall. So by us, we're on top and they feel they're on top, but why is someone should be falling off this so-called sphere? And he continues on that the scientists or the astronomers, they answer the following, that Adam Yesede Me'ofer, a human being's fundamental element is earth. We were made from Ofer Min HaAdama. That's why we're called Adam. So earth. V'chol Yesed, and every element is Meisheches Yesede, every element draws anything that comes from its family. So since the human being comes from earth, so we're drawn by earth. And that's why the earth draws the human beings who come from that same element, earth, and does not allow them to fall. Now, the question is, does he mean by this gravity? Because you could say gravity is not quite that. Gravity means every celestial body has a certain power that draws things to it. Here he's adding that it's drawing it because it's the same element. But let's even argue that it is gravity. Either way, he says, this is not the true answer. So based on this, you could say the Alter Rebbe is maybe not holding from the concept of gravity, or from the concept at least of the earth drawing down everything made from its own element. The Alter Rebbe, by the way, brings a similar idea in Tanya Perek Yutes, the other way around, about Eish, that Eish is nature's to go back to its Yesod Eish, to its source. There's the other way around. It's drawn upward because that's where the Yesod Eish is. Here, Ofer is drawn down. And the Alter Rebbe goes on to explain that the reason for this can be understood up in Kabbalah, because the earth is an eagle. And an eagle fundamentally doesn't have a top and a bottom. Since there's no top and bottom, that's the reason we don't fall, because for every one of us, that's the top. Not connected necessarily to this element. I'm only throwing this in because perhaps based on this, gravity is something the Alter Rebbe doesn't recognize, or at least does not take into account, both in this Maimon and Tovkuf Samach Beis, and perhaps also in Tanya, he doesn't address gravity because it's not relevant here. As I said, even if you do say gravity, water does affect by gravity in a way that it falls and cannot stand on its own. And a wall, stones, though a loose stone will fall, but a stone within a wall will not. And that's the only that's relevant in Tanya there. Okay. Let's now move to the essays. 3 essays. First one is a long Hebrew essay written, Can you achieve constant uninterrupted happiness, by Moshe Bernstein, age 53, Chadera, Eretz Yisrael. Very good essay. The only thing is, most likely why this was not given a high mark was because of its length. It was far longer than what was suggested. But it's an excellent essay, a very thorough overview of how, and guidelines, practical guidelines, how a person arrives to joy. Very appropriate as we enter the month of Adar. So he talks about 2 types of joy. Temporary joy from something happens to you, a good piece of news, you made money, a party, an event. And simcha and joy that's permanent joy, that's connecting to something that's eternal. So he begins with that distinction, which is a very good way to put it in context. And then he goes on a whole series of pages. How do you reach joy? Literally, I think maybe 20 methods that he suggests. Beginning with that fundamental decision that a person is going to have a positive attitude. Moving on to getting used to looking at things with the right eye, positively. Moving on to the next one, every day being thankful and showing gratitude. The next one is to recognize what you really believe in, your fundamental beliefs and how they affect your emotions. But he lists a whole bunch of things of negative elements, fundamental elements that cause a person not to be happy. Like when a person says, I'm not accepted by others. I'm never successful. I'm all alone. I'll never succeed in anything I attempt. I don't have any value. No one loves me. And goes how to counter these type of feelings with a positive attitude of seeing yourself as contributing a positive. I won't go through the whole thing. It's online, meaningfullife.com/essays. It's part of the essay still of last year's contest. I think it's a very good essay and probably could be the basis of a book. It's even, as I said, longer than a regular essay, but very fundamental. And of course, with the sources that he cites are from Tanya, chapter 26, chapter 33, I guess, Gedish 11, Maimorim of the Amitla Rebbe, Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab, and of course, Maimorim from the Rebbe himself. Okay, that's essay number 1. Next essay is The Rebbe's Enduring Leadership by Yechanan Gordon, age 34, 5 Towns, Jewish Times, Lawrence, New York. Okay, so The Rebbe's Enduring Leadership. This essay addresses the Rebbe's position of leading and how it empowers us. Many people feel today some feelings of ambivalence, he writes, resulting in the abandonment of Hasidic ideals. The notion of that we're able to connect to a tzaddik posthumously is written clearly in Zohar. And he goes into the whole discussion that even after Gimel Tammuz, how we can connect to the Rebbe and how it can become something very viable and real in our times. He talks about the Neshama Klolis, how the Rebbe ignites the flame in each one of us, and how we can, again, apply that to the challenges that we face today. The Rebbe Rashab's idea, Azir Gein Himmel, the Ksavim Lazachaych, and how the Rebbe writes, Rabbi Yisrael Ner Belenitsky, for me the Rebbe continues to guide me just as he has in the past, meaning that you could apply all these ideas right here, right now. It's a very interesting letter about his kashas, essay about his kashas, and I definitely recommend one reading it, using Rachel and Leah as well as an example of a concealed or revealed connection to the Rebbe. And summing up and concluding, if there was a message, if there was a message that the younger generation needs to hear now, is that although it seems that our parents and grandparents had it easier with the Rebbe at their side, directing them throughout the course of his leadership, our lot in that regard is no different. The only difference is the ultimate clarity we will be privy to if we persevere and stay the course despite the perceived darkness. And finally, essay number 3, which is Sorting Through the Uncertainty by Jason Shleimer Laufer, age 20, Kerem V'Yavne student, West Hempstead, New York. Basically, a young man, and he acknowledges that in his writing, but very mature piece, where he writes the following, that in today's rapidly expanding global economy, there are many opportunities to achieve financial success. However, they are accomplished with a great deal of risk that can cause financial and emotional instability. If viewed incorrectly, fiscal hardships such as losing one's job can be psychologically debilitating. However, by understanding and using Hasidic concepts such as birur, one can maintain emotional stability during the most tumultuous times. In contrast to superficial, temporary, modern self-help solutions, birur focuses on identifying and fixing deep underlying issues by focusing on changing the user's perception of reality, providing him/her with a short-term relief, as well as the skills necessary to achieve long-term personal growth and success. In order to effectively use birur, it is essential to understand how it works and when it can be applied. And he goes into a discussion of birur as a sifting, of using Tanya and other places, and applying it first with contemplation about how looking at life in a certain way. Then going to the next step is relating to how new things emerge in a person's life. And finally, a birur is an action, how it determines and defines a person's actions. Life oftentimes comes with periods of ambiguity and uncertainty. Chassidus, using concepts such as birur, can help one keep one's feet on the ground and maintain a stable sense of reality in these troublesome times. Very interesting essay, and acknowledges, as I said, his youth. And with that, we finish the 3rd essay for this week. And I want to bid everyone a very simchadike Resh Chedesh and Chedesh Adar Rishon Adar Sheni, a simcha that will permeate us in a revealed way, and in ways, and even if one has to go through some type of setback or challenge, as I discussed at the opening of this episode, we transform nepachu, we transform the negative into a positive, just as we transform the miyut, the diminishment of the moon, into a far more powerful force, where this year has extra days as a result of the lunar cycle. Everyone should have a very simcha dika Rish Chodesh, Afreilich and Rish Chodesh, and Chodesh Adar. It should be simcha for us all until Simchas Elam Al Reisham, when we'll celebrate the Gula Hamitis Vashlema. So until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., this has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 102. And please, I encourage you, we have 2.5 more weeks deadline for this contest. Submit, and may Hashem help you win. And I'm sure $10,000 can go a long way. As well as now that we have announced the judges, which are quite prestigious judges, and they're excited and looking forward to read your essays. Everyone is welcome to submit. So until again, Afreilich and Chodesh, and until next week, everyone be well.